All right, so let's start. What does being a Bhutto mean? This is a question that I hear the TEDx Youth Conference is interested in. I think we in South Asia tend to place perhaps a little bit too much importance on names. And being a Bhutto is, or it ought to be at least, like being anyone else. There are just 6 letters in this last name, and they are 6 ordinary letters. But yet it seems that in Pakistan at least, those 6 letters are the only qualification for rule. One doesn't need much else except some sort of vague dynastic connection to enter the fray. If we look at the current president in Pakistan, this would seem to be the case. Before ascending to the office of the presidency in exactly the same way that General Pervez Musharraf, our last military dictator, did, in that he was selected by his parliament to become president. He didn't run for elections, he doesn't represent a constituency, and he has no popular mandate. President Zardari was known as Mr. 10% in his wife's first government. And then in her second government, he was upgraded to Mr. 50%. And now in his government, he is Mr. 110%. But the qualification for his leadership seems to be this tenuous connection to a name. And certainly this is not unique to Pakistan. We see across South Asia a heavy history of dynasty, whether it's in Bangladesh or in India, Sri Lanka, and certainly in Pakistan. Pakistan at the moment, entering its 64th year, a very young year in a country's history, is at a crossroads. It has to choose now, more than ever, whether it wants to side along dynasty or whether it chooses democracy. But it cannot have both. In fact, no country can have both. And that's impossible for dynasty and democracy to coexist because they are in fact polar opposites. So whereas dynasty excludes, it is an exclusive system, democracy is inclusive. Whereas democracy is about participation, dynasty closes the door on participation. Whereas democracy is about tolerance and creative approaches to difference and to diversity. Dynasty is just about the same. It's about maintaining the status quo, about more of the same. And Pakistan certainly has a choice to make. And my vote really goes with democracy rather than with dynasty. And I imagine those of you sitting in India and certainly maybe watching around South Asia are aware of this curse of dynasty. And perhaps it's grown in South Asia. We now have dynasts that compete in elections. Maybe they compete in inter-party elections. But it still closes a system, in my view. Pakistan at the moment is a country on the brink, it's been described. It's called the most dangerous country on earth, the most unstable country on earth. It's at various points considered more dangerous than Iraq, more dangerous than Afghanistan. And all this is slightly hysterical because we have to make a distinction between the government and the people and know that Pakistan is a young country. At present, it is a country that has opened its skies to unmanned predator drones, to a foreign country to bomb its citizens as it pleases. So in the last year, in 2010, there were 110 unmanned predator drone strikes against the country. That's an incredible amount. In the last 2 years of drone strikes, we've had some 2,000 Pakistanis killed. Largely civilians, though Pakistanis will tell you they are probably all civilians because everyone killed in a drone strike is given one name, militant, would-be militant. But we're not told what their crimes were, we're not told where they hailed from, we're not told what they studied, or we have no pictures, we have no knowledge. They are nameless, faceless, unindicted people. You have the heaviest month of drone strikes taking place last year in September, which is the month after the very devastating floods that hit Pakistan. They were the worst natural disaster in our history as a country. The United Nations said that the floods that hit Pakistan in the summer and fall of 2010 were worse in terms of their scale of destruction and devastation than the Haitian earthquake, the Asian tsunami, and the 2005 Pakistan earthquake combined. The fallouts we're still watching, but from what we know now, some 6 months later, is that 20 million people were directly affected by the floods. 2 million homes were destroyed. 5,000 kilometers of roads. 1/5 of the Punjab's crops were destroyed. The food belt was hit very badly. 200,000 livestock. I mean, the numbers are, well, they're unreal, the numbers, really. And they keep coming, so we know again that 1.5 million cases of malaria were expected. Some 2 million fatal cases of diarrhea were expected. So this is a nuclear country where children still die of diarrhea. That's unacceptable. And why is it that we're in this position? And I think it goes back to the same question about the drones. Why is it that we're a country that has opened our borders up? And I think the answer there is corruption. If we look at Transparency International, that tracks and monitors corruption across the world, they estimated that 70% of dam maintenance money given to Pakistan was siphoned off into private accounts. That would explain, at least in part, the devastating consequences of the floods, but not all of it. We have a situation now where Pakistan is reliant totally on foreign funds to care for the people displaced by the floods. And again, there have been problems. The government has issued Watan cards, which are electronic cards that people must take to an ATM. Now, in most of the flood-affected areas, there are no ATMs, there are no banks. And those who have the cards and have access to banks, in many cases, have gone and found that the accounts are empty. Corruption is something that seems to define the state of play at the moment under this present government, certainly in Pakistan. And the horrifying anecdote I always quote is the fact that Pakistan missed its millennium goals to eradicate polio, not because we don't have the medical expertise, but and certainly we do. I mean, Pakistani doctors are amongst the best in the world. They work all over the globe. And Pakistan has hit great sort of landmarks medically before. We had leprosy under WHO control limits, way ahead of schedule, in the 90s, for example. But we missed our millennium goals to eradicate polio because we couldn't refrigerate the vaccines. That's corruption. And that's not just corruption in Pakistan, that's certainly corruption in South Asia. And we know that this is familiar either to listeners and viewers in India or in Bangladesh. Even in Afghanistan, even in Sri Lanka, perhaps. And what is it then that we do that we can talk about at a youth conference in South Asia? I suppose it's a turning back of these forms of political establishment that include corruption. You know, Napoleon said that in politics, absurdity is not a handicap. Well, it should be, and it certainly is in the region. If we look at India and Pakistan, and certainly the youth between these two countries, we know that we are a population that speaks the same language. We share the same history. We are both populations in great numbers under the age of 30 in our respective countries. We are populations that have moved tremendously in terms of the arts, in terms of expression, in terms of the media. But yet we're saddled with these governments that would keep us apart. Something that brought a lot of positive expectations, at least in Pakistan amongst young people, was this initial idea of the proposed gas pipeline. A pipeline that would take gas from Iran via Pakistan to India, a country that is gas hungry. And the pipeline would have necessitated peace. It would have necessitated an important peace, because both countries, Pakistan and India, would have been paid handsomely to protect the pipeline. But yet the deal was sidelined. It was sidetracked. The kibosh was put by America, who then gave India a nuclear deal, which again is not a temporary. It's only a temporary fix. It's not going to be a long-term solution. Can our governments manage to meet again and propose something that's far-reaching or that progressive. I don't know. But what I do know is that what's always been hopeful for Pakistanis is the idea of people-to-people contact. Whether we talk about youth leadership programs, whether we talk about the Pakistan-India People's Peace Forum, which is very highly regarded in Pakistan, as I hope it is in India. It's clearly up to us, I think, to build the bridges between our two countries. People build those bridges, governments erect them. And part of what we can do is insist that we have access to each other, whether it's through conferences like these, whether it's through easier visa regulations, more literary festivals, more artists going back and forth. The only way this happens is if we insist. And 60 years in, 64 years in, it's about time, I think, that we get insisting on this issue. If we look at the last 30 years of dynastic rule in Pakistan, because certainly we didn't have it before, we'll find that dynasty hasn't strengthened democratic institutions. It hasn't pushed for progressive reform. It hasn't pushed for radical reform. In fact, dynasty everywhere and anywhere you look and find it is stagnant. Whether you find it in Egypt with the Mubaraks or in Tunisia with the Ben Alis. And again, we find that it takes decades for the youth of these countries to unseat a political establishment based only on entitlement. But it does happen. I think when we talk about dynasty in Pakistan too, we know that what it has done has been destructive to the country. It has enshrined corruption, it has enshrined feudal systems, and certainly that same entitlement. And for the Bhutto family as well, it's not been a particularly exciting course. It occurs that every 10 years a member of this family loses their life in violent means, in violent ways. No one in the Bhutto family, in the immediate family, has lived past the age of 52. No one has reached the age of 55. And certainly we know that violence across South Asia is an incredibly easy way to deal with difference, with political opposition, with a media that's troublesome, with lawyers that are difficult, with human rights activists. And we see that everywhere, whether it's in India or in Bangladesh or in Nepal. Certainly in Sri Lanka, we've seen it very recently as well. So for me, dynasty has to be a part of our past. It has to be something we move away from. And the world shows this as well. I think we've seen this across the Middle East. If we look at France and we see that the French National Front, the very bigoted, very intolerant, almost fascistic French National Front has now fallen back on dynasty. So Jean-Marie Le Pen has chosen his daughter. Because maybe it's only dynasties that can push forward systems that are intolerant and exclusive. Certainly it doesn't work in democracies, or it shouldn't work in democracies. And for Pakistan, I think we have to know that this is a country stymied by its political establishment. And again, I would say that that's probably true for most countries. But Pakistan ought to be a rich country. We have gas, we have oil, we have natural resources. We have the land to grow the food with which we ought to feed our people, but yet they go hungry. In fact, we have the land and the resources with which we should be able to feed even our neighbors. But we are a rice-growing country that imports rice from Korea. Why is that? And again, this goes back to the curse of bad leadership and corruption. But Pakistan's future, I think, when we look at the future that certainly our generation envisages, is one that is just, that is one that focuses on endogenous economic development, not on foreign aid, because it doesn't need to. And one that will be able to devolve power, not just to a provincial level, but really down to the most basic level, the district and the town level. And I imagine this is something we share in South Asia, increased participation, and certainly more just systems of government. I think every citizen, certainly every responsible citizen, ought to participate in politics, but it's up to us to determine in which way we choose to participate. And for me, that's always been through writing. There is a freedom in the written word that you simply don't have in politics. You're not obliged to anybody. You're not indebted to anybody, and you can say what you like. And I do, and that usually gets me into trouble. But for others, it may be protest. For others, it may be art. For others, it may be music. You know, I'm wearing, well, you maybe can't see this out in the conference. I'm wearing a T-shirt made by young Pakistani designers, and they have started a socially conscious brand. The sales of and profits go towards water purification projects, go towards putting solar panels up in villages. And they usually come with quite political messages. So the one I'm wearing is a picture of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, and he's got a thought bubble that says, "Dude, where's my country?" That's a way to be political. And we see this in Pakistan every day. And it's a shame that the rest of the world doesn't see it. But we know in Pakistan that the youth especially is committed to a different country and to a better, more just, more inclusive country. And there are many ways to fight for that. So those of you sitting in the audience certainly have your own ways in which you will influence the future of your country. The same is true for Pakistan. For every 200 of you we have 200 in Pakistan. And I hope that at some point these 200 meet and become 400, and then 500, and then 600. But the way to be political certainly is up to us, and we have the liberty as a very young population to determine in which ways we choose to be political.